Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with me today. My name is Melanie Blake, and I'm the Director of Classical Pursuits. And I'm here to talk with you about the French underground press, Les Editions de Minuit. Before I do, I'd like to briefly introduce Classical Pursuits, especially for those who may not know us. We organize small group tours for people who, like you, are passionate about literature and the arts. And on the card here, we have an image of the Hôtel des Invalides in Paris, which is an important part of one of our upcoming tours. This is our May 2025 tour, Art and Resistance in World War II, Paris and Champagne. And I'm so excited about this brand new tour. You can see here on the right a novel, The Paris Deception. We're going to be reading this novel as part of our tour and traveling with the author herself, Bryn Turnbull, a best-selling author of historical novels based in Toronto, will be our tour host. And we're just really thrilled to have her as part of our tour. You might see here on the book cover that there's an looks like an art museum in the background. One of the major plot threads of Bryn's novel is inspired by real life events where employees at the Jeux de Paume Museum in Paris worked very courageously and at great risk to themselves to save art that was stolen by the Nazis from across France and Europe and funneled through the Jeux de Paume for distribution into Germany or sometimes for destruction. It's a really fascinating story. And we'll also be exploring a beautiful Champagne, its capital, Reims, and enjoying not only historical walks, but champagne tastings, the just absolutely astonishing cathedral in Reims, and many other wonders as well. We'd love to have you as part of this tour. If you'd like to learn more, or even better, if you are ready to book, please contact Abby at our partner Worldwide Quest. You can reach her at 1-800-387-1483 or email her at abby@worldwidequest.com. You can also visit our website, classicalpursuits.com, to get more information about the tour, and we're happy to tell you anything that you would like to know. We'd love to see you this May for Art and Resistance in World War II, Paris and Champagne. And Les Editions de Minuit is a big part of what we're going to be talking about on this tour. So I'm going to talk to you today about the history of this press, Les Editions de Minuit, the work they did during World War II, and their legacy on modern and contemporary literature in France and beyond. So Les Editions de Minuit was founded in Paris in 1941. The year 1941 was, of course, a very chaotic and turbulent one for France, Europe, and the world. France had surrendered to Germany in June of 1940, and the country was divided into two main zones. In the north was the occupied zone. In the south was the so-called free zone, with its headquarters in Vichy, headed by Marshal Philippe Pétain. There was this red forbidden zone that you see here all along the coast, another forbidden zone in the area around Lorraine here in the east, and other administrative zones. But as you can see, large parts of France were occupied or working in connection with the German government, as is the case for the quote free zone with its headquarters in Vichy. It's well known, of course, that arrest, deportation, and execution of Jewish people, resistance, and a variety of others who were deemed enemies of the Nazi forces were widespread, as were psychological and physical threats to the population as a whole. And you have a 1941 photo showing a man being arrested by Nazi forces in Paris. Another notice here gives some sense of this coercion and psychological control. This was a notice that was put up in the city of Nantes in Brittany on the West Coast. And this notice tells us that a reward of 200,000 francs would be given by the city of Nantes to anyone who could give information to the police about the assassination of a German Lieutenant Colonel Holtz. We see his name here. The Nantes police were soliciting information about the killing of this colonel, and then anonymity would be guaranteed to anyone providing this information, and anyone who had information was invited to present themselves at the main police station. So you can see here there were methodical and deliberate efforts to turn people against each other. Why Les Editions de Minuit? Well, minuit or midnight calls attention to the 9 p.m. curfew that was established in Paris in 1941, as we see here in this story reported by the New York Times. It was just another of one of these many methods of control employed by Nazi forces across France. And we're going to learn more about that on our custom walks during the tour with our guides Samuel and Lisa, our visits to museums such as the Army Museum at the Hôtel des Invalides. Another pervasive method of control was, of course, censorship, which was the norm in both these northern and southern zones. There was also direct media control by the Nazi and Vichy governments. So just to tell you a little bit more about this particular notice, which was posted early on, you can see here in July 1940. This notice tells us that it's formally forbidden to pass around any enemy propaganda material or to promulgate or propagate the ideas that were found in that material. And point 2 here tells us that any of this enemy propaganda material must be immediately given to the closest German authorities. So what was enemy propaganda material? Well, this would be any publications that had not been authorized by the German authorities or by authorities acting on their behalf. So as you can imagine, this would cover they were very determined to control their message, and it would be difficult to get material past them that they did not agree with. This material would have to be published clandestinely and underground. And punishment for publishing such material was strict and would get stricter and harsher as time went on. So we see here from this notice in 1940 that punishment could include imprisonment of a maximum of 15 years. There could also be fines, and these punishments would get progressively worse as the war went on and the Nazi forces were continuing their campaign of censorship and control. Determination to resist this censorship and to not remain silent were driving forces behind the founding of Les Editions de Minuit. The press was founded in 1941 by Jean Brulaire, who was an illustrator, and Pierre de Lescure, who was a novelist who was also working with British intelligence. Getty Images seems to own all the pictures of Pierre de Lescure, making them extremely expensive, but I did find an image here for you of the illustrator Jean Brulaire. And it was really important to Brulaire that he not be financially dependent on either resistance networks that were operating in France or on the Free French forces who were based in London under Charles de Gaulle. He wanted to operate independently. And to accomplish this, he worked with a network of friends and connections to get the press in action. Now, what did it mean to run a clandestine underground press? You had the same needs, of course, as any other press for materials and supply chains, but the challenges faced by an underground press were amplified. So and this just reminds us of the many dangers that faced writers, photographers, editors, printers, binders, distributors of illegally produced materials. They just in doing their work, they faced possible. Sorry, I think I froze for a second there. So these dangers were combined with materials shortages, paper, ink, and the machinery used to produce books, pamphlets, and newspapers were all very hard to come by. So for Bruyère, he needed to recruit authors to be part of his press, and I'll talk more about who wrote for Les Editions de Minuit in just a moment. He also needed to get these materials and find a way to have the work distributed. The story goes that a Parisian doctor donated $5,000 to Brûlé, or sorry, 5,000 francs. I'm sorry, 5,000 francs to Brûlé for his endeavor. And Brûlé would purchase small quantities of paper on the black market. He started working with a printer named Ernest Hollard, who at first set all the volumes that were produced by Les Editions de Minuit by hand. And he later found the linotype to do this mechanically. According to Time magazine, Brûlé worked with another contact named Yvonne Paraf. Together, Brûlé and Paraf would hand cut and bind the books in Paraf's apartment. And these books would then be delivered by bicycle. So you see one such setup here. This is an image I took from the Army Museum, the Musée de l'Armée, at the Invalides. You see a printer's workshop, the Atelier d'Imprimerie in the background with some of the materials used, and a delivery bicycle in the foreground. So books, or for the case of other underground presses, like the newspaper Combat, would be delivered by bicycle. Les Editions de Minuit would sometimes distribute their materials through the mail, which was also a risk, or pass them on to resistance networks for further distribution. The first work published by Les Editions de Minuit was Le Silence de la Mer, The Silence of the Sea, by Brûlé himself, writing under the pen name Vercours. And this refers to a mountain range that's in the eastern part of France, adjacent to the Alps. This was published in October 1942, and it's the story of a man and his niece who refuse to speak to the German officer who's billeted in their home, and that officer's own gradual disillusionment. Brûlé and his colleagues managed to produce about 350 copies of The Silence of the Sea, most of which were apparently distributed in the southern zone, the Vichy France. And those of you with eagle eyes might see that the year here on the bottom is not 1942. I will talk more about that in just a moment, because this is a republished version. After the war, so up through the liberation of Paris in August 1944, Les Editions de Minuit, they published approximately 20 to 25 books clandestinely. These included works by Vercours, also works by Louis Aragon, the surrealist poet, another poet who was very well known at the time, Paul Éluard, and François Mauriac. He might be who perhaps known to a North American audience as well. Les Editions de Minuit also had smuggled in the John Steinbeck's novel, The Moon is Down, which tells the story of a Northern European port town that was occupied by an invading army. And Les Editions de Minuit published the first complete translation of The Moon is Down. After the war, they would maintain the spirit of their founding and publish works like Premier Combat, which was collected the journals of Jean Moulin, who was a civil servant turned resistance fighter who died in 1943 following Nazi capture. And his very dramatic story will be part of our Montparnasse walk and also of our visit to the Museum of the Liberation in Montparnasse. Montparnasse was one of the points of entry for French forces into Paris in August 1944. I've put here for you a few lines from Premier Combat, from a letter that Moulin wrote to his mother and sister. And he writes, "I didn't know it was so simple to do one's duty when one is in danger. I am in good health despite the exhaustion of these past days. I am thinking of you with all my heart." And one of the things I'm most looking forward to on our tour is this. So Moulin, like many of us, was a complicated person. And on our tour, we're gonna walk straight into that large gray area, that large complicated area that was life in occupied France, where the line between right and wrong was sometimes crystal clear, but a lot of other times not visible at all. And we're going to really try to appreciate and feel what it would have been like in that situation. At the same time, that being said, here Moulin's clarity of vision really strikes me. And I hope, I cannot say for sure, definitely I cannot say, but I hope that I would have the same clarity of vision were I in his shoes. The press also published The White Rose by Inge Scholl. This tells the story of the German resistance, Sophie and Hans Scholl. Perhaps some of you saw the movie The Last Days of Sophie Scholl. And they also published Night by Eli Wiesel. Le Silence de la Mer, The Silence of the Sea, was republished, as I mentioned, not clandestinely. So the press was operating openly after the war. Le Silence de la Mer was republished in 1946, and it was a big commercial success. At the same time, the press still had financial difficulties, and in 1948, it was taken over by Jérôme Landon. And you can see him here on the left wearing the suit and tie. Jérôme Landon ran the press from 1948 until his death in 2001, so a really long time. And by many accounts, he was dictatorial, micromanaging. He would insist on the placement of commas, for example, in manuscripts, the placement that he wanted for punctuation. So maybe some would say micromanaging, but he was a singular force in French literature, and as head of Les Editions de Minuit, really helped shape 20th century literature. And he's shown here on the so for example, he was really the first publisher to recognize the talents of the then unknown Samuel Beckett, he published Beckett's first novel, Malone, and many of his other works as well. And so he's shown here, Landon here on the left, with another author, Alain Robbe-Grillet, I'm going to talk about in just a moment. And Jérôme and Alain are standing beside a portrait of Beckett there on the top right. That's Samuel Beckett. So it was in 1953 that Les Editions de Minuit published the first novel of another then unknown, Alain Robbe-Grillet, shown there in the center part of the picture. Robbe-Grillet was also a prolific essayist who wrote about um, the cultural shifts, cultural and literary shifts that writers like Beckett and like himself and others were tapping into, and about his own views on writing and literature. A lot of these views were shaping what came to be known as the new novel or le nouveau roman. So for Les Editions de Minuit, the year 1957 was a very important one for daring and unorthodox novels. In that year, they published a novel called Fin de Partie by Beckett, another novel by Robbe-Grillet called La Jalousie, Jealousy, Le Vent or The Wind by Claude Simon, La Modification by Michel Boutour, and a novel called Tropisme by a novelist whose name you also may recognize, Nathalie Sarraute. A critic at the newspaper Le Monde used the term nouveau roman or new novel to describe the books of Nathalie Sarraute, of Robbe-Grillet, and others. And this term stuck. So and those of you who are literary theorists are going to have my head because I'm really condensing into one sentence thousands and thousands of words that have been written about the new novel. But we could say that the idea here is that with each new work or each new work, there's a new novel on the meta level, more specifically, a new style. These new novel writers experimented with or sometimes just rejected qualities or devices that we would typically associate with the novel, like plot, chronology, character, the idea of an omniscient narrator, right, which is very prevalent in novels from the beginning of their history. These kind of novels don't appeal to everyone, and it's really easy to put them into the category of, oh, that's some kind of impenetrable French thing with very elitist with lots of isms attached to it, and fair enough, that's not for everybody. But I think it's important to note that the work of writers like Robbe-Grillet, Sarraute, and these other new novelists was influenced by writers such as William Faulkner, who had just a huge impact on American and world literature. And even if these novels aren't your cup of tea, I think they ask questions that are really important to all of us. It's like, what is our relationship to language? How does it shape our awareness, our relationships? How does language shape our very selves? These are fundamental questions. And Les Editions de Minuit and the books that they published were in the thick of the action of asking these questions. Another novelist you may recognize who worked for much of her career with Les Editions de Minuit is Marguerite Duras, and I've shown here her novel The Lover, L'Amant, published in September 1984, set against the background of a still from the movie that was later made of this novel. This L'Amant was an absolutely shattering success. There were more than 1 million copies in print, and it remains a very well-known story. Les Editions de Minuit continues to publish novels and other works today. You can see there, so one of the I did a research and scouting tour for our upcoming tour next May. I did that earlier this spring. And one of the absolute highlights of the tour for me was taking a walk with Samuel, who's going to be one of our walking tour guides on our tour. just the total immersion into the world that Samuel created for us. And a micro highlight for a book nerd like me was walking down the street and saying, wait a second, what is that door? That door is the is one of the doors for the administration or the administrative offices of Les Editions de Minuit. I was so excited, I couldn't believe it. So you can still see them there operating in Paris. You can find their books in still with this very simple, elegant cover with their very well-known logo. You can find them in any French language bookstore. So that's been a very short history of Les Editions de Minuit. Thanks so much for being with me. I'd like to also acknowledge the sources I used in putting this presentation together. And I want to talk to you about the next step. It's very simple. Register for our tour. Again, Classical Pursuits organizes small group tours for people who are passionate about literature and the arts. And one of our unique upcoming tours is our tour starting May 15th on art and resistance in World War II, Paris and Champagne, with novelist Bryn Turnbull, with two other novelist guides, Lisa Passold and Samuel Lopez Barrantes. And there's no other tour company offering a tour like this one. The combination of activities we do, these in-depth guided walks, seminars, reading Bryn's book, and another novel by a woman named Irene Nemirovsky. We're going to cooking class, some free time as well. That's part of all our tours. We'll just follow so many historical threads in Paris. And then in Champagne, we will be based in Reims in a truly fantastic hotel right next to Reims' beautiful Gothic cathedral. And we'll follow the thread of the role of the Champagne or Champagne region during World War II. But it won't all be history. We're going to have a lot of fun as well, tasting champagnes. We're going to visit a couple of big estates like the Pomeray estate, which is truly a neo-Elizabethan showstopper. It's just an amazing, amazing chateau they have there. Some smaller producers, and take some scenic drives in some lovely countryside. So we'd love if you can learn more, or even better, book now by contacting Abby at the information shown here, or visiting our website, classicalpursuits.com. Thanks so much again. I'll be sending a recording, a follow-up email with this recording and some more information about Les Editions de Minuit. Again, I'm Melanie Blake, the Director of Classical Pursuits, and I will see you in France in May 2025. À très bientôt.